The detective set down the folder and looked at me the way men look at car accidents on I-25, with that specific cocktail of pity and relief, that it wasn't them sitting where I was sitting. It was a Tuesday morning in late October, one of those Colorado mornings where the sky comes out pure and surgical, the Rockies sitting hard and white against it, like something God bolted up to remind you how small your problems aren't. The folder sat on the table between us. I could see my own name on the tab. Ray Colton Decker, DOB 04-12-1961. I was 62 years old, and I was being interviewed in a room that smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet, and the detective, a woman named Sergeant Alicia Ferris, dark hair pulled back, a notch of concern between her brows that she was working hard to keep professional, was looking at me like she was waiting for me to cry. I didn't cry. I was past that. I'd done that part in the parking lot of the El Paso County Assessor's office 3 weeks earlier, alone in my F-250, hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, the way I'd taught my son to drive in that same truck 18 years ago. That's the part that gets you. Not the money. Not even the house. The truck. The teaching. The ordinary Wednesday afternoon in the Walmart parking lot with a 16-year-old who had his mother's chin and my stubbornness, who couldn't figure out how to feel the brake and kept stomping it like he was killing a spider. We laughed until we couldn't breathe. I can still feel that afternoon. The smell of the cab, sawdust and WD-40, and the pine air freshener Marlene insisted on. Her voice from the back seat saying, "You're both hopeless." Sergeant Ferris slid a photograph across the table, a still frame from a security camera. A man at a notary's desk signing something. The man had my build, broad through the shoulders, hair gone silver at the temples. He was wearing my jacket, the green canvas Carhartt I'd had for 11 years, the one with the frayed left pocket where I kept my tape measure. "Do you recognize this person?" she asked. I did. I recognized him the way you recognize a scar. The way you recognize something that was once part of you. "That's my son," I said. "That's Ethan. If you're still reading, go ahead and tell me where you are right now. What city, what room, what hour. Because what I'm about to tell you isn't just my story. I've talked to enough people in the last year to know it isn't." Sergeant Ferris had gotten my name from a referral. A woman in Monument, Colorado, 40 minutes north of the Springs, who'd gone through something similar. Her adult daughter, her rental property. The same hollow architecture of trust turned against itself. Ferris was building a pattern. She'd been building it for 8 months when she called me. "Mr. Decker," she'd said on the phone, "I need to ask you some questions about certain financial instruments that appear to carry your signature. Some of them we can verify. Some of them," she'd paused, "I'd like you to come in." That was how I found out that my name, my social security number, my notarized signature, and my contractor's license, the license I'd held without a single blemish for 31 years, had been used to open 2 LLCs, refinance my primary residence, transfer the title on a commercial property I'd paid off in 2019, and apply for a $340,000 SBA loan. The loan had been approved. The money had gone to an account I'd never opened. I found that out on a Tuesday morning in late October, in a room that smelled like burnt coffee, with the Rockies sitting hard and white outside the window, and a detective watching my face to see if I already knew. I didn't already know. I wish, some nights, that I had. The charge they were most interested in that morning, the one that had Ferris looking at me with that careful, patient expression, was 18 U.S.C. Paragraph 1028, identity theft. The complication was that someone had filed paperwork, in connection with one of the LLCs, listing me as a co-managing partner. The refinance application included a voice recording of someone consenting over the phone, using my name, my date of birth, my mother's maiden name, and my childhood address in Pueblo. "There's a recording," Ferris said. "We need you to listen to it." She pressed play on a small digital recorder. The voice that came out of the speaker was mine, or close enough to mine that for 3 full seconds, I thought I was losing my mind. Then I heard the pauses. The slight hesitation before mortgage that I never have, because I've been saying that word professionally since 1988. The flat vowel in Colorado that was off by a generation. My generation says it one way, my son says it another. It wasn't me. But it was somebody who had listened to me long enough to know how I talk. I set both hands flat on the table. I felt the grain of the laminate under my palms. I breathed twice. "That's not me," I said. "But I know who it is. Let me back up. Let me tell you who I was before all of this. Because the shape of a betrayal only makes sense against the shape of what you built. I grew up in Pueblo, Colorado. the second of three boys raised by a man who poured concrete for a living, and a woman who kept the books for a Catholic school on the South Side. We weren't poor in the dramatic way. We were just careful. Every purchase had a reason. Every appliance got repaired before it got replaced. My father had hands like industrial gloves, cracked at the knuckles, permanently stained with a gray that no amount of lava soap could fully lift. I thought those hands were the most honest things I'd ever seen. I still do. I went to Colorado State Pueblo for 2 years, studying construction management, then left when the money ran out and went to work for a framing crew in Colorado Springs. I was 20 years old. By 23, I had my own crew. By 28, I had my license. By 32, Decker Custom Contracting was billing $2.1 million a year, residential and light commercial. Nothing flashy but solid. Word of mouth. Return clients. The kind of business that grows because you do what you say you'll do, and you don't surprise people with the invoice. I met Marlene in 1990 at a wedding in Manitou Springs, a mutual friend's sister, a paralegal with a dry sense of humor, and a way of looking at you that made you feel like she was deciding something. She was. She married me 14 months later in the backyard of her parents' house in Fountain. It was April, and it snowed 6 inches the night before, and we got married anyway, standing in 2 inches of slush, with everyone in their winter coats. Laughing, Ethan was born in 1993. We brought him home to the house on Waynoka Road in the northeast part of the Springs, a 3-bedroom brick ranch I'd bought as a project and spent 8 months making right. New roof, new siding, gutted kitchen, the works. He grew up watching me work. He'd be 4 years old, sitting on a sawdust pile in the driveway, eating a peanut butter sandwich, asking me questions about why we do things a certain way. I loved those conversations. I loved that he wanted to know by the time he was in high school. He was working summers with my crew. Not light work, real work, framing, sheathing, rough carpentry. He was strong and quick, and he had a good eye for level, which you can't really teach. You either see plumb or you don't. I thought he'd come into the business. I thought I was building something to hand to him. He didn't want construction. He wanted finance. He studied at CU Denver, graduated in 2015 with a degree in business administration, took a job with a real estate investment group in Denver. We were proud. Marlene was proud. She'd drive up I-25 to have lunch with him whenever she had a day off. Marlene was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in February of 2019. She was gone by September. I tell you that so you understand the emotional landscape I was standing in when the first favor got asked. The grief after Marlene was not a wave. I've heard people describe grief as waves, and I don't know. Maybe for some people it is. For me, it was more like a low-pressure system that moved in and didn't leave. The house was the same. My tools were the same. My routine was the same. But the air pressure was different, somehow. Everything took slightly more effort than it should. I'd pick up the phone to call her 6-7 times a day for a year, and each time my thumb found her number and stopped, I'd feel it again, that specific absence, that space in the air. I retired in the spring of 2020. Officially, I'd been winding the business down since Marlene's diagnosis. I didn't have the bandwidth to manage crews and hospital schedules at the same time, and I didn't have the heart for it after. I sold the equipment, let the business entity lapse, converted my remaining contracts to subcontractor relationships so the work could be finished without me. I had the house, paid off. I had a rental property on Academy Boulevard, a small commercial strip I'd bought in 2011 and paid off in 2019, generating about $42 a month. I had a 401(a) and an IRA in reasonable health. I had a pension from a stint I'd done as a building inspector for El Paso County in my late 30s. I wasn't wealthy, but I was settled. Marlene and I had been careful the way my father taught me, the way both our families taught us. I was settled, and I was alone, and my son called me from Denver in November of 2020, just after Thanksgiving, one of those post-holiday evenings when the quiet in a house gets heavy, and said he had an opportunity he wanted to talk to me about. I said, "Come on down, I'll make dinner." He came down on a Saturday. I made a pot roast, his mother's recipe which I'd gotten passable at. He sat at the kitchen table and he looked good, put together, confident, that easy manner he'd developed in his 20s that was so different from the serious, effortful kid I'd raised. He talked about Denver, his apartment in Low-High, a woman named Cassandra he was seeing, normal things. Then, after dinner, he opened his laptop. He'd found a property, he said. A small apartment complex in the Thornton area, North Denver, 8 units. The numbers worked, he said, and he wanted me to look at them. He was in a position to manage it. He understood the market. He had the contacts. But the financing structure required an experienced property owner with a proven credit history and verified income. A cosigner, essentially, on the initial LLC and the acquisition loan, just to get them past the underwriting threshold. It's a pass-through on paper, Dad, he said. You're listed as managing partner, but that's just for the underwriting. Once we're operational, it's all on my end. You don't do anything. You just exist in the structure. He had a printed spreadsheet, projected cash flow, repair estimates, comparable sales in the area. He'd done his homework. That much was clear. He knew how to make numbers look like a story. I looked at the spreadsheet. I looked at my son. He had his mother's chin. He had those gray eyes she had, the ones that were always slightly more perceptive than whatever they were looking at deserved. I thought about how much I trusted him. I thought about how trust in my business had always been about evidence. You trust a beam based on its grade stamp and its moisture content. You trust a foundation based on the soil report and the pour date. You trust a subcontractor based on his license, his references, his prior work. I did not think about any of that when my son put a folder of documents across the kitchen table and said, I just need a couple of signatures tonight, and then the attorney will handle the rest. I signed. I didn't read every page. I was ashamed of that later. I am still ashamed of that. But I want to be honest about it, because the shame is the important part. Not because I think I deserved what happened. I don't think that. But because the shame tells you exactly where the vulnerability was. The place where my careful habits broke down was my son. The one person in the world to whom I had decided, somewhere deep and structural, that different rules applied. I signed 4 documents that Saturday night. I would later learn those 4 documents were the operating agreement for Pinnacle Edge Properties LLC, a Colorado registered entity, a consent form authorizing Ethan as sole signatory on the LLC's bank account, a limited power of attorney for real estate transactions, and a document I believed was a utility authorization form that was, in fact, a quitclaim deed transferring the Academy Boulevard commercial property to the LLC. I didn't know about that last one for 14 months. The behavioral changes, in hindsight, form a clear pattern. At the time, they were noise. Ethan had always been a little close with information. He'd been that way as a teenager, private about his social world, protective of whatever internal calculations he was running. I'd attributed it to introversion, to his generation's different relationship with privacy. After his mother died, I attributed it to grief, but the visits became less frequent after that November dinner. We'd talk on the phone, weekly, then bi-weekly, but when I asked about the Thornton property, about the loan process, about any paperwork I needed to sign, the answers were vague in a specific way. Not evasive exactly. More like a busy professional managing expectations. It's in process, Dad. These things take a while. The title company is backed up. In the spring of 2021, my credit card was declined at a hardware store in Manitou Springs. This has never happened to me. I've been carrying a Visa since 1985, and I have paid it in full every month for 36 years. I stood at the register with a woman behind me who had the grace to look away, and I felt something, embarrassment. Yes, but underneath that something else. A flicker. I called the bank. There was a balance on the card of $14,400. I had not charged $14,400 to that card. The charges were from 3 businesses I didn't recognize and one I barely did. A lumber yard in Brighton, Colorado, 60 miles north, where I had no active projects and hadn't been in years. The bank representative was polite and methodical. She asked me to hold while she noted the dispute. She said someone would be in touch. I sat in my truck in the hardware store parking lot and I made a list. I made lists for a living. A list was how you didn't miss things. The list had 4 items: credit card charges, Thornton property, no update in 6 months, POA documents. What exactly did those authorize? Academy Boulevard property. When did I last check the county records? I should have gone further. I should have started calling that day. Instead, I called Ethan. He answered on the 3rd ring, sounding distracted. Someone probably lifted your card number, Dad. Happens all the time. Dispute the charges and get a new card. He was reassuring in that practiced way, not false exactly, but smooth. Too smooth. Like the answer was already prepared. The insomnia started that spring. Not dramatic. I wasn't lying awake in a cold sweat. I'd just find myself at 2 in the morning, fully awake, running structural calculations in my head that weren't about buildings. Running lists. The knee I'd injured doing framing work in 2008 started talking to me again in the mornings, stiff and grinding on the stairs the way it did when stress accumulated. My body has always been a better diagnostic tool than my conscious mind. I didn't connect it. Or I did, partially, and then I stopped. That's the other thing I want to tell you honestly. The will to not know is a real force. It doesn't feel like denial from the inside. It feels like patience, like charity, like giving the people you love the benefit of the doubt. It feels like being a good father. It is a kind of blindness. But it's the specific blindness of love. And I'm not sure there's a treatment for it, except time and evidence. The evidence arrived in February of 2022. A letter from Coastal Federal Savings, a bank I had no relationship with, confirming the status of a mortgage in my name on my home at 4412 Waynoka Road, Colorado Springs. Loan balance, $218,000. Monthly payment, $1,847. First missed payment, January 15, 2022. I read that letter 3 times standing in my driveway in the February cold, in a thermal shirt and jeans because I'd just come back from the mailbox and the cold registered the 3rd time through. I went inside. I sat down at the kitchen table where I had signed those documents 14 months earlier, and I felt the floor shift under me. Not physically, but in the way floors shift when you realize the load path you calculated is wrong. When you realize the structure you believed in doesn't go where you thought it went. I called Marlene's name before I could stop myself. The house was quiet. That's the end of the beginning. Now let me tell you how I built a case. I called the locksmith the next morning and changed the locks on the house. Then I called the bank, the real bank, Banner Bank, where I had my actual accounts, and put a fraud alert on everything. Then I drove to a UPS store on Academy Boulevard, which is where I had rented a mailbox years ago for business correspondence, and which I had not checked in 8 months, because I believed I had no active business correspondence. The mailbox had 11 pieces of mail in it. 2 were from the Colorado Secretary of State's office, addressed to Pinnacle Edge Properties LLC CA Ray C. Decker. 2 were from Coastal Federal Savings, early payment reminder and overdue notice. 1 was from a collections agency regarding an unpaid account at a business supply vendor in Aurora. 1 was from a law firm I didn't recognize, addressed to Decker and Ruiz Holdings LLC. I didn't know what Decker and Ruiz Holdings was. I photographed everything with my phone before I touched any of it. I'd watched enough investigation shows with Marlene to know that, at minimum. Then I put everything carefully into a manila envelope I bought at the UPS store counter, and I drove to the El Paso County Assessor's office on East Vermijo. The woman at the counter was patient. Her name tag said Patricia. I explained, as calmly as I could, that I was trying to verify the current ownership status of 2 properties, and that I might have reason to believe documents had been filed I wasn't aware of. She pulled up both addresses on her screen. The house on Waynoka Road, ownership unchanged, Ray C. Decker. But there was a lien recorded. The Coastal Federal Mortgage filed October 14, 2021, the Academy Boulevard property. Ownership transferred to Pinnacle Edge Properties LLC, October 15, 2021, 1 day apart. Patricia looked at me. She had a grandmother's face. Competent, unsentimental, capable of bearing bad news without flinching. Do you want me to pull the transfer documents? I said yes. She printed them. I sat in a plastic chair by the window, and I looked at the quitclaim deed, and I looked at my signature on it, and I thought about all the things I know about signatures. I've signed tens of thousands of documents in my professional life. Permits, contracts, change orders, bid forms, supplier agreements, lien waivers. My signature is not complicated, a capital R, a swoop, then my last name and something close to print, but it has specific characteristics. The R has a particular leg. The D in Decker has a specific lean. This signature had the right elements, but it moved differently. The pressure was heavier on the upstrokes, lighter on the down, which is the opposite of mine. The R's leg didn't close the way mine does. Someone had practiced my signature until it was almost right. Not quite. I sat in that plastic chair for a long time. Patricia checked on me once. I told her I was fine. I was not fine. But I was building something in my head. The way you build before you build. The mental model that has to be right before you pour anything. I was building the shape of what had happened to me. That was the moment, in the parking lot of the El Paso County Assessor's office, in my F-250 with the sawdust still in the cab and the pine air freshener Marlene liked, that I cried. I gave myself 10 minutes. Then I drove home and called my daughter. If you're still with me, Drop a comment below and tell me if you've ever had that moment. The moment you realize the shape of a thing. Before you have proof. Before you have a single piece of paper that would hold up in court. But you know. You just know. My daughter is Renata. She's 33, 2 years younger than Ethan, and she works as a senior data analyst for a logistics company in Denver. She has a master's degree in applied statistics from Colorado State. She is the most methodical person I have ever known, which I say with the deepest possible affection, and she has known since she was about 12 that her brother was capable of very specific kinds of charm. I called her at 7 on a Wednesday evening. I told her what I'd found. There was a silence. Then she said, "I'm going to need you to not touch anything else until I get there this weekend. I've already photographed." "Good. Don't do anything else. Don't call Ethan. Don't contact any of these banks. Let me come down and look at this with you." She arrived Friday evening with her laptop, a portable hard drive, and a banker's box of printed research she'd already done. Secretary of State business entity filings, public property records going back 5 years, the registered agent information for both LLCs. She'd driven down I-25 in her Subaru with the box on the passenger seat, and she'd been working the whole way, which I believe is exactly like her and also extremely dangerous, and I chose not to ask. We sat at the kitchen table until 1 in the morning. She showed me what she'd found. Pinnacle Edge Properties LLC was registered with the Colorado Secretary of State on September 22, 2021, 7 weeks before that Saturday dinner when Ethan had asked me to sign the documents. Not after. Before the registered agent was listed as Ethan M. Decker, I was listed as the second managing partner. My address, my date of birth, my contractor's license number, all in the filing, but the LLC had been formed before Ethan ever showed me the spreadsheet. "He didn't bring you an opportunity," Renata said. She wasn't angry, she was clinical. That's how she gets when she's hurt. "He brought you documentation for something he'd already set up. He needed your signature on paper. He already had everything else. The notarized documents," I said. "2 of them are notarized by someone named Velez. A Christina Velez, notary commission out of Adams County." She turned the laptop toward me. "Her commission is valid. She's a licensed notary. But look at the date on the acknowledgement." I looked. The notarization date was October 12, 2021. I had signed those documents in November. "The notary stamped documents that didn't exist yet," I said. "Or she stamped blank pages. Or she stamped copies where the content was later substituted." Renata clicked to another screen. "Either way, she's part of this." I poured 2 inches of bourbon into a glass and set it on the table and didn't touch it. I just needed it to be there. "How much?" I said. "Altogether, if you had to estimate." She had a spreadsheet already. My daughter always has a spreadsheet already. The mortgage on the house. $218,000 principal drawn. Approximately $6,000 in fees and costs. The Academy Boulevard property, conservatively valued at $380,000, transferred for consideration of $1. That's what the deed said. $1. The SBA loan, which we didn't know about yet but would find in the records 2 days later, was $340,000. Disbursed to the LLC account in 2 tranches. The collections account for the supply vendor in Aurora, $23,400. Approximately $967,400 in total exposure, nearly $1 million. My daughter looked at the number on her screen and then she looked at me, and her expression was the same one she'd had. The morning we told her about her mother's diagnosis. Not shock, because Renata processes things too fast for shock, but a kind of sorrow that sits very still. "Okay," I said. "What do we do?" "We don't confront him," she said immediately. "Not yet. We build the whole picture first. Every document, every filing, every transaction. We find the notary. We find the loan file. We find out who Decker and Ruiz Holdings is and who Ruiz is." She picked up her bourbon. I realized I'd poured one for her too, without thinking, out of habit. She held it but didn't drink it. "Then we go to law enforcement." "I need to talk to someone about this," I said. "You are talking to someone, a lawyer." "Yes, I have a name. Someone who handles financial crimes. She's good." She finally drank the bourbon. "Dad, I need you to understand that this is going to take a while. It's going to feel slow and it's going to feel inadequate. But if we do this right, it sticks. If we do it wrong." She didn't finish that. I nodded. I understood about doing things right the first time. It was the only professional lesson that had ever really mattered. The next 3 weeks moved in 2 registers simultaneously. The surface register, where I went about my days with the careful normalcy of a man who is not building a legal case against his own son, and the subsurface register, where Renata and I worked through a system of evidence collection that I will describe for you in as much detail as I can, because detail is the point. Detail is the thing that saves you or doesn't. Here is what we did. Colorado maintains a public database through the Secretary of State's office. The Colorado Business Database, accessible at sos.state.co.us, through which any member of the public can search entity filings, registered agents, annual report histories, and officer information. Renata had pulled all of this already, but we went deeper, pulling the full filing histories for Pinnacle Edge Properties LLC and Decker and Ruiz Holdings LLC. The latter had been registered in May of 2021, 6 months before the November dinner. Managing partners listed: Ethan M. Decker and Marcus A. Ruiz. I didn't know a Marcus Ruiz. I'd never heard the name. Renata looked him up. Marcus Antonio Ruiz, 37 years old, Denver address in the Westwood neighborhood, listed occupation on various public filings as real estate consultant. A Colorado driver's license issued 2019. Prior to 2019, no Colorado record. She found an older address through the DMV public record interface available to licensed investigators. Our attorney, Sandra Okonkwo, pulled this through her firm's Access in Phoenix, Arizona. In Phoenix, Marcus Ruiz had a record, a 2016 plea agreement on a single count of wire fraud, reduced from 5 counts with a suspended sentence and 3 years of probation. The underlying scheme: a real estate investment operation that used elderly property owners' signatures to refinance properties, siphoning the proceeds through a series of pass-through LLCs before the paper trail could be followed. My son had gone into business with a previously convicted wire fraud operator. Whether he had known about the conviction, I couldn't say then. I still can't say for certain now. What I can say is that the mechanics of what was being done to me matched Marcus Ruiz's prior playbook so precisely that it was either deliberate or the most coincidental thing I've ever encountered, and I've been in construction for 31 years, and I don't believe in coincidence when I can read the beam marks. The SBA loan file was the procedural masterpiece, if I can use that word. We got access to it through Sandra Okonkwo, who filed a records request with the Small Business Administration under the Freedom of Information Act, a process that takes 20 business days minimum. One of those moments where you learn the hard way that justice has scheduling constraints. But what came back 47 days later was revelatory. The loan application for Pinnacle Edge Properties LLC, in the amount of $340,000, had been submitted in August of 2021. Listed applicant: Ray C. Decker, sole owner. The application included my social security number, my contractor's license, 3 years of what appeared to be my personal tax returns, a letter from my accountant verifying income, a personal financial statement signed in my name, and a phone recording of me consenting to the loan terms. The tax returns were fabricated. I have a CPA in Colorado Springs, a man named Gerald Huang, who has done my taxes for 15 years. He had produced no such documents. The letter on his letterhead was a forgery. We contacted Gerald, who was horrified and who became one of our witnesses. The phone recording, the one I'd heard in Sergeant Ferris's office, had been obtained using a technique that Sandra Okonkwo had seen once before in a financial fraud case in Denver. They'd called me posing as my bank's fraud prevention line in the spring of 2021. I remembered the call. I remembered going through verification, giving my date of birth, my mother's maiden name, my childhood address. I thought I was preventing fraud. I was providing the raw material for it. Renata found the outgoing call in my old phone records. I'd kept the bills, because I keep everything, a habit my father instilled in me. The number had been spoofed to look like my bank's 800 number. She traced the actual number to a burner registered through a prepaid carrier. The carrier's activation record showed the SIM had been purchased at a convenience store in Brighton, Colorado, where the lumberyard charges on my credit card had originated. There's a moment in structural investigation when you're trying to figure out why a building has developed a crack, why a floor has deflected, where the evidence stops looking like a collection of unrelated symptoms and starts looking like a story, where the pathology becomes legible. That moment for me came when Renata found the Brighton connection. Marcus Ruiz had a prior address in Brighton, 3 years old but still. He's running operations from there, Renata said. Or was. We drove up on a Thursday afternoon in a rental car. Sandra Okonkwo had advised us not to use vehicles registered to me, which tells you something about how seriously she was taking this, and found the address. A unit in a light industrial park near the 168th Avenue corridor, one of those anonymous beige buildings with roll-up doors and shared hallways. The unit number from the old address records was 14. A placard on the door said Ridgy Line, Prophetess. I didn't touch the door. I photographed the placard, the building exterior, the mailboxes in the lobby, the name on the adjacent unit. Then we left. But before we left, I noticed something. On the mailbox for Unit 14, below the business name, someone had placed a small label, the kind you print at home, white Avery stock courier font. The label said, C. Velez, Correspondence. Christina Velez. The notary, Renata, photographed it and sent the image to Sandra Okonkwo before we were back on the highway. I want to tell you about the moment we found the secondary victim, because it changed something in me that I hadn't expected to change. Sandra Okonkwo had been in contact with Sergeant Ferris Concealed Crimes Unit, which sits within the Colorado Springs Police Department, but coordinates with the Denver DA's office on multi-jurisdictional cases. And Ferris had quietly confirmed that there were 2 other individuals in the investigation with patterns similar to mine. She couldn't share their names, but she could tell us that one of them had already been approached and was cooperating. His name, when we eventually connected, was Donald Pearsall. Dunn was 68, a retired electrician from Broomfield, widowed in 2020, same as me, within 4 months. He had a stepson, not Ethan, someone else, who had brought him an investment opportunity that used many of the same structural elements. Pass-through LLC, limited POA, notarized documents with the wrong dates. He'd lost his rental property, a small duplex in North Glen he'd spent 20 years paying off. We met at Sandra's office in Denver, a conference room on the 14th floor of a building on 17th Street with a view of the mountains that felt almost inappropriate given the circumstances. Don was a big man, bigger than me, with a gray mustache and the kind of stillness you develop after decades of patient, precise work. He had a banker's box of his own documents. He'd also been building a case. He looked at my documents and I looked at his, and we didn't need to say much. The architecture of both schemes was too similar to be independent. The LLC structure, the spoofed phone call, the notary with the wrong dates. All of it matched with the kind of precision that pointed to a single template. A playbook. Do you know Marcus Ruiz? I asked him. He said the name out loud slowly, like he was tasting it. I know an A. Ruiz. Anthony Ruiz. He approached my stepson, said he was an investor. Is Anthony from Phoenix? Don looked at me. I think so. How did you? Brothers, Renata said quietly. She had her laptop open. Or cousins. Give me a minute. It took her 4 minutes. Anthony Ruiz, 35, currently residing in Thornton. Prior address, Phoenix, Arizona. No Colorado criminal record. Arizona, a 2014 securities complaint dismissed, and a connection through a business filing in Adams County from 2020 to Decker and Ruiz Holdings, LLC, 2 brothers, 2 elderly widowers, 2 retired tradesmen with clean credit and paid-off properties, and the specific vulnerability of loving someone who exploited that love. Don Pearsall looked at me across Sandra Okonkwo's conference table and said, I kept thinking I'd done something wrong, that I'd been stupid. You trusted your kid, I said. He's not my kid. He's my late wife's son. You trusted him. He was quiet for a moment. Then, yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? That's the wound underneath the wound. Not the money, though the money is real and the money matters. The wound underneath is that you trusted someone completely, and they used that completely. And you can tell yourself, I tell myself, that the capacity to trust that fully is not a weakness, that loving without suspicion is not the same as being stupid, that the failure was theirs, not yours. But it takes a while to believe it. I was still working on believing it. The confrontation happened at Ethan's company holiday party. I know that sounds operatic. Let me explain how it was actually my son's idea without him knowing it. In late November of 2022, Ethan called me to invite me to the annual client appreciation event his firm hosted. It was held at a venue in the Ladue neighborhood of Denver, a restored warehouse space with exposed brick and Edison bulbs, the kind of place that costs more per hour than I used to pay my best foreman in a day. The event was scheduled for December 9, a Friday evening. He called to invite me because we had been maintaining the surface register. I had not confronted him. I had not changed my patterns, had not sent any signals of what Renata and I had been building for 9 months. I still called him on Sunday evenings. I still asked about Cassandra, about work, about his apartment. I did this because Sandra Okonkwo had been very clear. Do not spook him before the legal net is in place. Do not give him time to move assets, delete records, or flee jurisdiction. But the phone call with the invitation gave me an idea. I called Sandra. I said, "This is a public event, semi-formal, at a rented venue in Denver. He'll be in his element. He'll have witnesses. Is there any reason this can't be the moment?" She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "If Ferris can have someone in the room and we can coordinate the timing with the DA's office." Yes, this could work. But you need to understand what you're asking for. I understand. You'll be in the same room as your son. He will be performing for an audience. When it happens, it will happen in front of people he knows and people he doesn't know. That will be difficult. I've been through difficult. I know you have. I'm saying this specific kind will be different. She was right. She was right about that. Colorado is a one-party consent state under CRS 189303, which means that a recording of a conversation is legally admissible as long as one party to the conversation consents. I was that party. I wore a recording device, a small digital unit that Sandra Okonkwo's investigator, a former FBI agent named Kessler, fitted under my shirt collar in a parking garage near Union Station at 6:15 on the evening of December 9, 2022. The device was voice-activated, backed up in real time via Bluetooth to a phone in Kessler's jacket. Everything I heard would be preserved and transmitted simultaneously. Sergeant Ferris and a Denver PD financial crimes detective named Ibarra were in plainclothes in the venue, one at the bar, one near the entrance. The DA's office had issued material witness summons for Ethan and Marcus Ruiz, timed for after the event, so we had legal authority to detain them for questioning. Sandra Okonkwo was on standby by phone in a car 2 blocks away. Renata was with me. She was wearing a navy dress and her hair down, and she looked like someone who had come to a party, which she had, and also like someone who had been rehearsing this moment for 9 months, and was ready, which she also had. The venue was warm and loud when we walked in. The crowd was 60 or 70 people, clients, associates, some firm staff, a jazz quartet in the corner. The kind of event that signals success, comfort, belonging. Ethan was near the center of the room when we came through the doors. He looked, I'm going to try to describe this accurately. He looked genuinely happy to see me. And here is the thing I was not prepared for. Even after 9 months of preparation, I didn't know, looking at his face, whether the happiness was real, whether some part of him had genuinely compartmentalized what he'd done, whether the son standing there with his open face and his mother's eyes had convinced himself of something that let him feel, in that moment, like a good son inviting his father to a party. People do that. I've come to understand that people are capable of extraordinary internal architecture. You can build a structure of justification so solid that you live in it without ever questioning the foundation. He embraced me. I let him. You made it, he said. I said I would. I said we got drinks. We talked. He introduced me to 2 clients, a man from Boulder and a couple from Aurora who were investing in a commercial property he was advising on. He was charming, practiced. He touched my shoulder twice while telling the couple about a building I'd constructed in 2003, a story I'd told him when he was 10, using it now as social currency, as evidence of a family narrative that positioned him as the inheritor of something solid. I stood there and let him. Marcus Ruiz was there. I recognized him from the DMV photo Renata had obtained. He was shorter than I'd imagined, maybe 5'9", compact, a dark suit, a careful smile. He was talking to a man near the bar. He hadn't noticed me. Renata caught my eye. Her expression said, I see him. I nodded, about 40 minutes in, during a natural lull in the crowd noise. While the band took a short break, I steered Ethan toward the back of the room, near a corridor that led to a catering area, away from the main cluster of guests. I'd been working the room naturally, not forcing it, letting him lead, and when the moment appeared, I took it. He came willingly. He thought we were just finding a quieter spot to talk. I went to the El Paso County assessor, I said. A beat. Just one beat. But I was watching, and it was there. What? He kept his voice light. Why? The Academy Boulevard property, I said. I wanted to check on something. The LLC holds that now, Dad. I thought we talked about this. It's structured more efficiently. I also talked to Gerald Huang. Another beat. Slightly longer. My accountant, I said, in case he'd forgotten which Gerald. I hadn't. He told me he never prepared the tax returns that appeared in the SBA loan application. He never signed a letter on his letterhead. He'd never heard of Coastal Federal Savings. The room noise behind us, the crowd, the quartet tuning back up, created a bubble. Ethan looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen since he was maybe 8 years old and had broken something and wasn't sure yet how much I knew. I don't know what you think is happening, he started. But there are legal documents. I've read the legal documents, I said. All of them. The ones I signed and the ones I didn't. I've had a forensic document examiner look at the signatures on the quitclaim deed and the mortgage application, and she produced a 12-page report that I'd be happy to summarize. He was very still. The notarization dates are wrong, I said. Christina Velez's notary seal appears on documents dated before I signed them. She's associated with the Brighton office, which is associated with Marcus Ruiz, who has a prior wire fraud conviction in Arizona. His brother Anthony is connected to a second case, different victim, same architecture. I watched his face work. I watched him cycle through something. Not guilt exactly, though maybe guilt was in there somewhere, but something more pragmatic. But I was watching him run calculations. You should have a lawyer present before. He started. You should have one too, Renata said. She had come up beside me quietly. She was holding her phone screen toward him, showing the Colorado Secretary of State, filing for Decker and Ruiz Holdings with his name on it. The recording device I'm wearing, I said, my voice steady, has been transmitting to a third party since I walked in the door tonight. Sergeant Alicia Ferris of the Colorado Springs Police Department Financial Crimes Unit is currently in this room. A detective from Denver PD is also here. The DA's office has issued material witness summons for you and for Marcus Ruiz. Ethan looked at me. Then he looked at Renata, then around the room, and I watched him locate Sergeant Ferris at the bar, because he was smart, and he understood what he was looking at. She was watching him with that same patient, careful expression I'd first seen in the interview room. He looked back at me, and in his face, underneath all the calculation and the fear and the composure that was, in that moment visibly failing, I saw something I hadn't expected to see. Something that looked, if you squinted at it, almost like relief. I don't know what to do with that. I've thought about it a lot. I think some part of him knew, the way structures know when they're overstressed. I think he'd been waiting. Dad, he started. Don't, I said. Don't talk to me right now. Not until you have a lawyer. You understand why. Marcus Ruiz was already moving toward the exit. I watched Kessler, Sandra Okonkwo's investigator, step away from the wall and intercept him. Ruiz said something I couldn't hear. Kessler said something back, quiet and even, and Ruiz stopped moving. Across the room, the jazz quartet started playing again. A slow thing, something with a walking bass line, completely indifferent to what was happening in the back of the room, which struck me as appropriate. Life is like that. It keeps its own tempo. I walked to the bar and ordered a glass of water and stood there while things unfolded around me. Renata stood beside me. She didn't say anything. She put her hand on my arm, just briefly, and then took it away. That was enough. I want to tell you now about the thing I didn't expect. The thing that changed the map. Renata called me on a Tuesday evening in mid-January of 2023. She'd been reviewing the financial records that the DA's office had subpoenaed and shared with Sandra Okonkwo's team in preparation for arraignment. Specifically, she'd been looking at the transaction history for the LLC accounts. There was a pattern in the disbursements that didn't fit. A significant portion of the outgoing transfers, she said, went to a vendor listed as Mountain Recovery and Wellness LLC. I looked it up. It's a residential treatment center in Jefferson County. I was quiet. Ethan's been there, she said, twice in the last 4 years. Once in 2019, once in 2021. I found the admission records through the LLC's business account. They were billed directly, listed as a business expense under staffing and wellness. She was being careful with how she gave me this information. I could hear it in her voice. How much? I said. The treatment stays? About $84,000 over the 2 admissions. And the rest of the money? Marcus Ruiz got the majority of it. Ethan's personal draws from the LLC were, they're not nothing, Dad, but they're much smaller than Ruiz's. Ethan was spending on treatment and on what looks like a significant gambling debt. There's a payment to a company that the DA's team believes is a debt collection front for a sports betting operation. I sat down. I was in the kitchen. The overhead light was on, the one over the table that Marlene always said was too bright. And I looked at that light for a while. In Act 3 of this story, back when I was digging, I had noted a few things I couldn't fully account for. Ethan's effect in recent years, a kind of manic clarity alternating with a flatness I'd attributed to grief. The way he'd sometimes seemed to be managing energy rather than feeling it. The times I'd called and gotten voicemail for days, and then received a return call where he was slightly too upbeat, too organized, like he'd been rehearsing. I'd attributed it to stress, to his generation's relationship with work-life pressure. He's an addict, I said. He has a documented substance use disorder, Renata said, which is a real thing and it's serious. It doesn't, I know what it doesn't do, I said. It doesn't excuse it, no, but it explains some of the shape of it, why Ruiz was able to pull him in, why the money wasn't sitting in an account somewhere, why, I stopped, why he needed something from me that he couldn't ask for directly, why he built a machine to take it instead of sitting at this table and saying, "Dad, I'm in trouble, I need help." Why the machine was so elaborate, because the shame of asking directly was more than the shame of deception, at least until you're inside the deception and it has its own momentum. I am not forgiving my son. I want to be clear about that. What was done to me was illegal and deliberate, and I was not its intended beneficiary, and it cost me nearly $1 million in exposure and 2 years of my life. And Ethan is an adult and an educated one, and he made choices. But I am also a father, and I am capable of holding both things. Renata was quiet on the line. Then she said, "Are you okay?" "Not yet," I said, "but I understand more." There's something to be said for understanding, even when it hurts in a different way than not understanding. The arraignment was February 14, 2023. I didn't choose that date. The court calendar did, with the serene indifference of bureaucratic systems to personal irony. Denver District Court, Division 8. Ethan and Marcus Ruiz were co-defendants. Anthony Ruiz had been indicted separately on Don Pearsall's case in Broomfield and would be tried in Adams County. Christina Velez, the notary, had entered a plea agreement in exchange for cooperation. She received a deferred judgment on the notary fraud charges and agreed to testify. The charges against Ethan were wire fraud under 18 U.S.C. 1343, identity theft under 18 U.S.C. 1228A, criminal impersonation under CRS 185113, and conspiracy to commit financial institution fraud under 18 U.S.C. paragraph 1344. The wire fraud charge alone carries up to 20 years per count. The identity theft aggravated charge carries a mandatory 2-year consecutive term against Marcus Ruiz additionally. A prior conviction enhancement given the Arizona plea, and a charge under 18 U.S.C. paragraph 1349 for conspiracy to commit wire fraud. His bail was set at $500,000. He did not make bail. Ethan's attorney, a private defense lawyer from Denver named Riordan, argued for release on personal recognizance given ties to community and lack of prior record. The judge, a woman named Honorable Carmen Esteves, set bail at $75,000 with conditions: electronic monitoring, surrender of passport, no contact with me or Renata, and weekly check-ins with pretrial services. Ethan's aunt, Marlene's sister, Patricia, who lives in Aurora, posted his bail. I found that out from Renata, who called me from the courthouse hallway. I didn't say anything about it. Patricia has her own relationship with Ethan that is separate from mine. I understood that. I sat through the arraignment in a row behind the prosecution's table, next to Sandra Okonkwo, and watched my son stand before a judge and enter a not guilty plea in a voice that was flat and steady and gave me nothing to read. He didn't look at me when he came in. He didn't look at me when he left. The legal process, as Sandra Okonkwo had prepared me to understand, does not move at the pace your nervous system would prefer. There were motions. There were continuances. There were discovery timelines. There were 6 months of procedural architecture before the case moved meaningfully toward resolution. During those 6 months, the asset freeze motion that Sandra had filed in February took effect. The LLC accounts were frozen. The Academy Boulevard Properties title dispute was entered into the court record, and Coastal Federal Savings, which had knowingly or unknowingly participated in a fraudulent mortgage origination, was separately named in a civil action coordinated by Sandra and a banking attorney she brought in. That civil action was my best route to recovering the house equity. The criminal case's restitution order would handle some, but civil action handles the rest. In August of 2023, Marcus Ruiz accepted a plea agreement, guilty to 2 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of conspiracy. Sentencing guidelines with the prior conviction enhancement, 46 to 57 months federal. He was taken into custody immediately. Ethan's case went to trial in October. I testified for 3 hours over 2 days. Sandra had prepared me exhaustively. She'd told me to answer only the question asked, to pause before answering, to look at the jury when I could, and to let my professional history speak for itself. She'd told me, "You are the most credible person in that room. Don't get emotional and don't explain yourself." Just tell what happened and let it land. I did that. It was the hardest professional task I've ever completed, and I framed buildings in February in Colorado, which I'll tell you is no joke. The jury deliberated for 2 days. They returned guilty verdicts on 3 of the 4 counts. The criminal impersonation charge was acquitted, the jury apparently finding insufficient evidence that Ethan had personally impersonated me via the phone recording, as opposed to directing someone else to do it. On the wire fraud and identity theft charges, guilty, sentencing was December 19, 2023. I sat through the impact statements. When it was my turn, I stood at the podium and I told the truth. I told the court that my son had used the documents of my professional life, my license, my signature, my credit history built over 31 years, as raw material for a fraud, that my wife had died 4 years earlier and my son had understood my vulnerability and had used it, that nearly $1 million of my life's work had been put at risk, that I had spent 2 years building a case instead of building the life I'd earned. I also told the court what I'd learned about my son's struggles, that I believed he'd been exploited in turn, by Ruiz, by the addiction, by the shame spiral that had led him to choose deception over asking his father for help. I said that directly. I said, I believe if he had asked me, I would have helped him. I don't know that for certain, but I believe it. Then I said, I'm not here to ask for mercy or for harshness. I'm here to ask that whatever happens next gives him a chance to become someone worth knowing again. Because I have not given up on that possibility, and I don't intend to. I sat down. Sandra touched my arm once. Judge Steve sentenced Ethan to 38 months in federal custody. Credit for time served on the electronic monitoring, followed by 3 years of supervised release with mandatory substance abuse treatment. Restitution order, $623,000, payable to me over the supervised release period from any income above a basic living allowance, with the civil settlement expected to cover the remainder. The SBA loan, the mortgage, the Academy Boulevard title, all of it is in ongoing civil proceedings. The estimates as of this telling are that I'll recover approximately 82 cents on the dollar. Not everything, but most of it. Enough. Ethan was remanded into custody immediately after sentencing. He looked at me once, from the defense table, before the marshal took him through the side door. I don't know what that look was. I've thought about it many times. It was something between sorry and something I don't have a word for. Something beyond sorry. I held his gaze until the door closed. It's now June of 2024, 6 months and change since sentencing. I want to tell you what the morning looks like from here. I get up at 5:30, which is when I've always gotten up. Because my body doesn't know what retirement means, and I've stopped arguing with it. I make coffee in the same machine, a 12-cup Mr. Coffee that cost $32 in 2017 and works perfectly. And I take it to the back deck of the house on Waynoka Road, which is still mine, the mortgage dispute having been resolved in March, with Coastal Federal Savings agreeing to a full rescission and payment of legal fees as part of the civil settlement. I'm still working through what that means emotionally, that I'm sitting on my own deck and not someone else's asset. Some mornings it feels ordinary. Some mornings it feels like something I won back. The Rockies are visible from the back deck on clear days. This morning it's clear, the kind of dry Colorado clarity that doesn't exist in most places, that cuts everything into hard edges. The mountains sit there the way they always have, indifferent and permanent, doing what they've always done. I find that useful. The permanence of something that large, that old, that completely unimpressed by what any individual human has done to another. Renata calls on Sundays. She's been promoted at her company, a new title, more responsibility, and she sounds the way she's always sounded when she's in the right work, focused and dry and quietly satisfied. We talk about ordinary things, cooking, her apartment in Denver, the dog she's thinking about getting, which I have been cautiously encouraging. We talk around the case sometimes and sometimes through it. She's in therapy, which she mentioned in the same tone she'd used to mention taking a vitamin. Matter of fact, practical, the logical maintenance for a difficult year. I'm in therapy too. A man in Colorado Springs, a licensed counselor named Watts who works with a lot of retirees and a lot of people who've experienced financial loss. He talks about grief compounding, about how losing Marlene and then losing whatever version of Ethan I'd believed in, those two losses stacked and fed each other in ways that made both harder to process cleanly. He uses a term, double mourning. I'm not crazy about the term, but I understand what it means. You're not just grieving one thing, You're grieving the story you'd built around the thing. I've started doing some consulting work. Nothing big. A few days a month, helping a general contractor in Monument with plan reviews and scope assessments. He's younger than me, mid-40s, a good builder who knows what he knows and knows when to ask. I like working with someone like that. I like the feel of reading plans again, the specific pleasure of understanding how a structure is supposed to hold. My knee is better. That's the most absurd indicator of well-being, maybe, but it's real. The grinding on the stairs is mostly gone. I've been sleeping. 7 hours usually, which for a 63-year-old man with a rebuilt life is, I'll tell you, a genuine luxury. The Academy Boulevard property is back in my name as of April. The title dispute was one of the easier resolutions. The quitclaim deed having been demonstrated fraudulent, the transfer was voided by court order. The commercial tenants, a nail salon and a tax preparation office, had been paying rent to the LLC for 14 months. That rent was included in the restitution calculation. The first monthly restitution payment from Ethan arrived in May. It was $240. It sounds small. It's not meant to be a large number. The arrangement accounts for his prison job income and the minimum living allowance on supervised release. The point isn't the amount. The point is the mechanism. The point is that what was taken will be, over time, acknowledged and returned. I've written him twice. He's at a federal correctional institution in Colorado. I won't specify which one, and he's in the substance abuse treatment program there, which Sandra Okonkwo confirmed is one of the better-run ones in the system. He wrote back once, a short letter, on institutional stationery, without much in it. He said he was okay. He said he was sorry. He said he understood if I never wanted to hear from him again. I wrote back, I do want to hear from you again, but not until you have something real to say. Take your time. That's where we are. That's where we're going to be for a while. It's not a resolution. It's a holding pattern above a field that might, eventually, become a place where a plane can land. Before I go, I want to say something directly to you. If you've stayed with this until now, you've earned it. Here is what I know. Trust is not a weakness. I want to be very clear about that, because the lesson that certain people will take from a story like this, and I know because I've told versions of it at a lunch table and watched people nod in a way that worries me, is that you shouldn't trust people, that you should always read every document, that love should come with liability waivers and notarized consent forms. That's not what I learned. What I learned is that there's a difference between trust and inattention. I was inattentive, not to my son's character. I knew his character, the good and complicated whole of it, but to the signals he was sending that something was wrong. The flatness, the distance, the managed quality of our conversations that I read as his generation's emotional style and should have read as a man in crisis who didn't know how to ask for help. Attention is love. Paying attention to someone, really paying attention, not just maintaining the relationship, not just going through the motions of connection, but actually watching and listening and noticing when the temperature changes. That's love made practical. That's love doing something. I was so focused on my own loss, on getting through the grief of losing Marlene, that I wasn't paying the kind of attention I should have been paying to my son. That doesn't make me responsible for what he did. But it means there were signals I missed that, if I'd caught them, might have given him a different path. The other thing I know is this. The skills you build doing honest work are the skills that save you when something goes wrong. The ability to read a document, the habit of keeping records, the discipline of building systematically, piece by piece, verified before you move on. Those aren't just professional tools, they're survival tools. Teach them to your children, practice them in your own life. And this, if something feels wrong, make the list. Whatever your version of the list is, the mental inventory, the spreadsheet, the phone call to someone you trust. Make it before the feeling goes away, because the feeling doesn't lie. The feeling is the structure telling you it's overstressed. Wherever you are right now, whatever city, whatever season, whatever morning or evening this is for you, I hope you're paying attention to the people you love. I hope you're watching for the temperature changes. I hope, if something is wrong, you're building toward it instead of away from it. That's all the lesson I have. I sat on the back deck this morning until the coffee was cold. The mountains were doing what they do. The sky over Colorado was doing what it does in June. Wide and honest and blue in a way that, if you grew up here, you stop noticing the way you stop noticing your own hands. But I noticed it this morning. I've been noticing more things lately. I picked up the cold coffee and I drank it anyway, because I've never been able to throw out a cup of coffee, not in 40 years, not even a cold one. My father's son, then, I went inside and got to work. If this story reached you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. The next one is coming. It's about a woman in Tennessee who built something and nearly lost it and didn't.